We talked about where his numbers were, and he was a little discouraged because his friend was 10, 12 points higher. And you could see it in his face and his shoulders. And I was like, but wait a second, show me where you were at this time last year. And he opened that data folder and was like, oh my gosh, I've grown 35 points. And it was a new kid within 5 seconds.
When I was initially asked to put together a session for Fusion, I immediately thought of my beginning years in teaching. And during that time, I was using the MAP growth assessment for reading with my 10th grade students. And I realized that our students didn't really understand their data. And I think that is a common issue across all primary and secondary education in the country. So I ended up starting what I called a data folder process. And Angela, as my student teacher, learned that process very well and ended up taking that a step further and improving it.
Yeah, so I have my students go through and in the data folder process, they track their RIT scores. Over time, we do it at least twice a year. And then I have them look at their achievement percentile. And I explain to them exactly what that means. You know, that's if I take 100 students at your grade level, that's, you know, the percentage of students you're scoring higher than. And they get really into that piece. They want to know where they stack up against others, not just in their class, but everywhere else. And then we talk about, you know, the strand scores and the individual categories within that and how they can use that information to then grow on an individual basis. So I try to incorporate opportunities for them to kind of individualize their learning based on those results from the MAP scores.
I know a student who had been particularly struggling with attendance and academics, and just really overall self-esteem too when it came to academics, was hearing from other students and his friends what their scores were. And when he came over and we had this data chat with his data folder, we talked about where his numbers were, and he was a little discouraged because his friend was 10, 12 points higher. And you could see it in his face and his shoulders. And I was like, but wait a second, show me where you were at this time last year. And he opened that data folder and was like, oh my gosh, I've grown 35 points. And it was a new kid within 5 seconds, because physically having that ownership where he might not have looked at that number for a few months, or really that was from spring to fall. So of course they're not looking at it over the summer. Right. But when he went back and really reflected on where he has come from to where he is, maybe he's not proficient yet or where his best friend is yet, but knowing how much he put in the work and grew really made a difference to him. And then we talked about, okay, now you're on the right track. What are some things you think you've done that have made those positive changes? And then what could we maybe add in? You're clearly doing something right. That's working. You're in routines, but what are some additional strategies we can implement to help you grow even more? So those are like the moments that you're like, yes, this is what we do it for. When that kid went from looking at the floor to, you know, his chest sticking out and a smile on his face, that's really what we want for all kids.
To piggyback off that, how demoralizing for the student to constantly be told that they are not proficient without any context as to why or what they can do or what those numbers actually mean in terms of their ability level. And that, I think, to me, that is really the heart of the data folder process, is allowing students to see that the data is what empowers them, not what discourages them.
Especially for a kid who's always been told, you know, in other words, that they weren't enough. They finally were able to say, like, look what I did. I went from this to this. The focus is on growth. It's okay if you come in and you have the lowest score in the school. That's not what matters to me. I want to see that you can take that score and you can own it and you can say, I'm going to do better next time, and that you do that. And if that's 1 point better, great. If that's 10 points better, also great. And building up that culture and just getting the kids to buy into that, and getting the teachers that we're talking to tomorrow to understand that, look, it's you have to set that tone. And, you know, the data folders is one way to do that.
And I think it's very easy to be overwhelmed as an ELA teacher. It's always another thing, another thing, another thing. And I think when we specifically talk about data folders, it can very quickly be seen as, another thing I have to check off for my administrator. But really, when we see teachers implementing it with purpose and their students buying in, it is not just another thing. It becomes the thing that really drives the growth over the course of the year for students.
Yep. From a position of working with building administrators, district coaches, and teachers, I think I would just add is the importance of forcing yourself to start. And every educator that hears this knows what I mean by forcing yourself. There is never enough time. There will never be enough time to start something new, but you have to at least try.
Because sometimes it does feel overwhelming and like, I don't know how to have these conversations with kids. So a lot of times I spend purposeful, intentional time with teachers modeling these kinds of conversations and helping them track and reflect on their class data. So that they can then use those practices with their own students, because it is not something that comes natural to everybody about how to help people dive into their data without leading them to the answer. So I think too, it's the much bigger picture of the stakeholders. It has to be from the top down in buildings, helping principals and assistant principals better understand growth data as well, so that they can support teachers, and then teachers can ultimately support students in that process.
What is the leadership reception of this and reaction to this?
They love it. Where I am at Walnut Hills, they are really trying to figure out how to get buy-in from other teachers.
I actually have multiple examples of intervention specialists taking what they saw the ELA teacher doing to the math teacher, or the ELA teacher, the ELA intervention specialist loved, then they developed the process for their self-contained, and they adapted it to include their self-contained students' math data. And it's just, that is education. It's you drop one droplet of water and it ripples. You might not ever see where the ripple ends, but it does ripple.
Well, I think when we talk about life skills that they get out of this, it's the reflection piece that really pays off big time, because no matter if they go into college or a career or the trades, they're going to have to reflect on their practice and what am I doing that's not successful? What could I be doing? And that to me is building really a lifelong learner and somebody who we want to be leading the world in the future. Yeah.